which is a fixed second law, and that is this is a fixed second law, right? And normally when the dopant concentration is low, not heavily doped, then we can approximate this as a something like this, right? We can approximate to this part, but if is heavily doped, so that the diffusion coefficient is a function of diffusion length or the dopant concentration or the time of diffusion, then this thing cannot be get out of the bracket. So we have to use the whole equation like this, and we have discussed about this D is consists of a neutral and negatively charged vacancies couple and doubly negative charged couple, and we also have positively charged vacancies diffusion and doubly positively charged vacancies contribution to the diffusion coefficient. Now this thing experimentally we can find it, so always it can be neglected. So last time we have discussed about the boron, which is itself is negatively charged in the silicon as an acceptor, and then it should be coupled with at least the neutral vacancies or positively charged vacancies. So the diffusion coefficient of boron has a term, okay? Diffusion coefficient of a boron has a term neutral and the positively charged term, diffusion coefficients, right? Now, today we are going to talk about the phosphorus and arsenic and antimony things, which is a group 5, which is N-type dopants, and itself is positively charged because it donates the electron to the conduction band in silicon, and it should be coupled with neutral vacancies and negatively charged vacancies and doubly negatively charged vacancies at least. So the diffusion coefficient of phosphorus and arsenic and antimony thing, group 5 elements, should consist of these 3 terms. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated than the boron, right? And the last time we talked about the arsenic case, and in arsenic case, we just have to think about a neutral term and the doubly negatively charged term, and it's almost a box type. The diffusion is looks like almost a box type. So the charges in the arsenic case is just let's say this is a junction depth, and this is the dopant concentration, and just the area is going to be corresponding to the charges of the dopant atoms. Today we're going to look into the case for the phosphorus. Okay, phosphorus is a little bit complicated, as you can see in these discussions. I got a terrible cold, so I'm losing my voice. So you tell me, huh? These are the okay, phosphorus diffusion profiles. These are the references. So whenever you meet the questions, you can refer to the references, or of course you can contact me. Now, phosphorus diffusion coefficient is going to consist of 3 terms, and because the phosphorus itself is positively charged, so it should be coupled in a substitutional diffusion in the silicon, so that the neutral vacancy couple and the negatively charged and doubly negatively charged, and so it consists of 3 terms. Even though at a certain temperature D minus is always higher than the D double minus, but in front of a singly charged one, it has to be multiplied by the concentration of the dopant N here. But in case of a doubly negatively charged case, according to the mass action law, we have to have N squared in front of a diffusion coefficient here. So even though this value is much less than this values, we have to multiply that with the N squared term in front of the doubly negatively charged one. So this has to be considered. It's a dominant factor in a heavily doped case, okay, when the N value is large. So it's oftentimes this is neglected. We can set, so the heavily doped case usually it consists of 2 terms, this term and the doubly negatively charged term here. Okay, just said about the electric field effect, which we have discussed the last time, which is going to be maximum 2. But just for now, let's just forget about the electric field term here. That itself is not that big number, and we really don't understand why. For example, in the minus case, when it's coupled with the P plus, then it should be regarded as a neutral, so that no electric field should be considered at this term, even though we have to consider here and here, because it's net charge, it shows the net charge, right? So electric field effect should be working on these 2 terms, not on this term, but in this equation it just says the electric field effect affects on every term here. Well, it just says the pseudo-electric field. Whenever you meet the word pseudo, it means that we don't understand why. Okay, you just think we don't understand why. But in this equation better fit the experimental data. So even though we don't understand the basic reason, we just put the electric field effect in front of every term here. And then this equation fits the experimental data better than just to put the electric field effect on this term and this term. Okay, this is the experimental data. We have seen this before, and then with this data, we have a diffusion coefficient term, and we have an equation 33. As I mentioned earlier, we just neglect the term here because when heavily doped case, the N tells everything, so it should be dominant. And this is diffusion. we have diffusion coefficient is proportional to the n square, as supporting to the equations that we have developed, and then this is the experimental data. What happened? Okay, this is the diffusion profile of phosphorus, and the y-axis is the concentration, and then this is the depth, physical distance from the surface. Now, this is not obviously the Gaussian profile as you expected for the low concentration of the phosphorus case. This is somewhat deviated from the normal Gaussian profile, and the Gaussian profile is the solution of this approximated fixed second law. Now, the deviation has been pointed out here. In the surface, diffusion coefficient is proportional to the n square, which means the former diffusion coefficient here equation, in this, at the surface, this will dominate the whole thing. Because at the surface, the concentration is the highest at the surface, okay? So that's what we expected, but in the experiment, it really says at the surface, the diffusion coefficient is proportional to the n squared. When n drops, decrease from the surface, as you go away from the surface, then naturally you're going to have a decrease in the concentration of the dopant, and then n drops to the values Ne, which is Ne is the concentration of electrons. Well, supposedly, all the phosphorus give up donate to one electron. So the concentration of a phosphorus is equal to the concentration of electrons in the equilibrium case in the room temperature, but it does not really happen. At the surface, when heavily doped, the phosphorus concentration is more than the electron concentration, because we do not have full ionization at the high concentration. But when you move into the depth, okay, then the concentration of phosphorus decreases. And then we approach it to the full ionization situation, and in that situation, the N is equal to N is the concentration of phosphorus, and Ne is the concentration of electrons. Okay, so when phosphorus concentration is equal to the electron concentration, means we have a full ionization, then diffusion coefficient is certainly proportional to the n to the minus 2, not the positive plus 2 for short transition region. And in the tail region, at the end of the diffusion, the diffusion coefficient is enhanced some values to the constant value. So why in the tail region the diffusion coefficient of phosphorus is suddenly increased to reach to the saturation values? All those A and B and C should be explained to understand the phosphorus profile that I've shown you just before this slide. Note also that N is equal to Ne, phosphorus concentration and the electron concentration. The chemical and electrical profiles coincide. Okay, that means the full ionization, right? Chemical profile means the phosphorus concentration, and electrical profile means just the electron concentration. So this means that we have a full ionization. How can you explain this? This is another plot which has a diffusion coefficient, and this is the electron concentration. Okay, this is just the other way around to look at the phosphorus diffusion profile that I've shown you just before this slide, right? Figure 4-40. Now, note the behavior described by A, B, and C above. This behavior, dP, is diffusion coefficient of phosphorus, is quite strange. And then in this class note, we just follow the references from Fair and Tsai. Okay, that has been given in the reference before I start this lecture. Now, this is another plot. Big. Everything on the range. Okay, this is a summary of what we have seen, the concentration and the physical distance. And this is the table actually to explain why we have this A, B, C strange behaviors. And then the explanation is given below here. Now let's just read this. The essence of this model means Fair's paper. In heavily doped regions, the concentration of doubly negatively charged vacancies will be large, and P plus and V double minus complexes will exist. Okay? Much better, right? So the law of mass action, we have surface concentration and intrinsic concentration of silicon, of dopant, electrons. And here the subscript I is the intrinsic concentration. Oh, I misprint here. Concentration of P plus and V double minus pairs. P plus the V double minus pairs diffuse down the concentration. Here's another end missing. Until we meet this concentration where the full ionizations at this point, which is point 11, the ionization energy is corresponding to the 0.11 electron volts, and the double negatively charged vacancies is going to be dissociated into singly negatively charged vacancies because of the moving the Fermi energy level because of decreasing in the concentration. You know, when you decrease the concentration of dopant, then the Fermi energy is going to be changed. And then, according to the location of the Fermi energy levels relative to the ionization energy, this reaction will happen or not is going to be determined by the location of the Fermi energy levels. So, as we go inside from the surface, the dopant concentration decreases, so that the Fermi energy is going to be the Fermi energy is going to be changed, and then suddenly this reaction can happen. This doubly negatively charged vacancy is going to give up one electron, and it itself is going to be singly negatively charged vacancies. Okay? So the reaction might be one of these two, which is depicted here. P plus doubly negatively charged, which is dominant at the surface, at heavy concentration case, so that at surface the concentration is proportional to the n squared, right? Because it's a doubly negatively charged vacancies coupling. And this one is going to be dissociation reaction is going to be singly negatively charged vacancies coupled and give up one electron. And then consequently, it's going to be dissociation reaction happens, P plus and singly negatively charged vacancies and electrons. Or this one can directly go into the P plus and V double minus dissociation. And afterwards, this doubly negatively charged vacancy is going to be dissociated to give up one electron, and itself is going to be singly negatively charged. Either of this reaction can happen when the phosphorus concentration becomes equal to the electron concentrations, full ionizations, so that the fermion energy is going to be changed to make this reaction happen. In either case, we can have the equation 36, and then you couple with the 34, we end up with the vacancy concentrations relative ratio is going to be represented by the surface concentration in the electron concentration and the intrinsic carrier concentrations. Okay, well, in the paper says the rate of dissociation reaction, which is given under 34 of a P plus V minus pairs, is just e to the 0.3 electron volts per kT times the rate of dissociation of P plus V double minus pairs. In this paper, it just explains in detail. So if you are interested in how these values come from, where this value come from, you can look into the paper, which is given in the reference. I have this reference paper, so if you want, you can get a copy of it easily from me. Just to let me know. Physically, this occurs because if the upper reaction proceeds, this dissociation reaction, the V singly negatively charged vacancies are in excess of concentration called for by the Fermi energy position. So with this dissociation reaction, the important point here is that the V minus concentration, singly negatively charged vacancies, is going to have extra numbers by this dissociation reactions. In other words, if you have, you just said the P plus is going to be coupled with a neutral and negatively charged and doubly negatively charged vacancies. Okay? Now, when this dissociation reaction happens, then extra V minus is coming from this V double minus vacancies. Inherently, it has V minus, but another V minus is going to come from the dissociation reaction of V double minus. So this extra V minus will enhance the diffusion coefficient of the phosphorus at this doping levels. That's what the main argument here is that. So we have at the tail region diffusion coefficient, we have this extra amount of extra enhancement of the diffusion coefficient at the tail coming from the dissociation reaction of doubly negatively charged vacancies into the singly negatively charged vacancies because of the dissociation reactions. All right? So at the tail region, we have an enhancement of the diffusion coefficient, as you can see here. Am I going too fast? Is it okay? Well, so here the substitute I means intrinsic diffusivity. Intrinsic diffusivity means we have a diffusivity according to the coupling with the singly negatively charged vacancies. We have that values, right? So actually we have this much enhancement in the equation shown in equation 39. So at the tail region, we have equation of 40, and then we have these values. This is old values. We have discussed about this. This is empirically determined. And negatively charged diffusion coefficient is also given. And this is a plot, and at the tail region, we have an enhancement of the diffusion coefficient. The y-axis is the diffusion coefficient, okay? And equation 40 gives a reasonable agreement with the experiment. Note electric field factor H has not been included in the 40. Again, the electric field effect factor is just we don't understand, but we just empirically put those numbers. It just said generally must be included without any reasoning. It is in general necessary to use a numerical technique to calculate. There's a misspelling here. So many misspelling. Calculate the phosphorus profiles accurately, because the diffusion coefficient is a function of oops, especially near the surface, where the diffusion coefficient is basically proportional to the n square, right? So we have to use the numerical technique, which is simple to use the computer, but we just want to get we want to understand the physics behind this, so that we have this argument, all right? And the summary of the diffusion profile of the phosphorus can be shown like this. This is obviously not a Gaussian profile. Gaussian, if you draw the Gaussian profile on here, it maybe at the tail region we have an enhancement, and at the surface we have another enhancement, because it's proportional to the n square, so that the Gaussian profile may go somewhere something like this. Okay? Note that the model does not do too well in the transitions from the surface to tail. At the kink region here, at this part, the experimental and the calculated values is not really matching, but the other areas is pretty much, it shows a pretty good matching, right? But here at the transition short period of the distance, do not too well. Here the dp is somehow proportional to the n to the minus 2, which is not well modeled as yet. And some simple analytical formula you just if other impurities are present below the diffusing phosphorus, their diffusivities will be enhanced also. The particularly important example is the emitter push. I have talked about the emitter push last time, but here, if you have M minus emitter and then a P boron, not phosphorus, this is a boron base, and then as an M plus, if you use the phosphorus as an emitter, then we have a situation like this. But at this M plus, the phosphorus diffusion profile at the tails, as you have seen, that it generates a lot of vacancies because of the dissociation reaction from doubly negatively charged vacancies to the singly negatively charged vacancies. Those dissociation reaction gives up, renders a lot of vacancies, which will help diffusion of this boron. So at this end, a lot of vacancies is going to be created and then affect the diffusion of boron only at this tail regions. So compared to other areas where the no effect of phosphorus is expected, we have some depth in the diffusion right beneath the phosphorus diffusion. This can be understood in terms of the theories that we have developed just now. Okay, now here the base region below the phosphorus emitter is pushed ahead. In other words, boron diffusion is enhanced by the excess vacancies released by the P plus V doubly negatively charged pairs, according to the dissociation reaction of the doubly negatively charged vacancies into the singly negatively charged pairs. Assuming that the charge state of the vacancies is always that is called by the local, here's a misprint again, local Fermi energies, P plus and the P base region, then we just make this is an approximation. It just says that the ratio of enhancement of a boron is just to the same ratio of the enhancement of a phosphorus due to the excess vacancies. Okay, we just assume that. Then the enhancement of a boron from the intrinsic it's going to be explained some equations just like this, and then here you can see the enhancement of a boron diffusion is just the same as the enhancement of the phosphorus because of the dissociation reaction from the doubly negatively charged vacancies into the singly negatively charged vacancies. This is this may look the big assumption, but as you can see in the experimental data, it turns out that it's not that bad assumptions at all. Here, I should replace this some other figures. It's a bad copy. The y-axis is the delta, then with the pushed the length, and x-axis is the it looks like a temperature, and then it basically says about this equation 41. And this is the theoretical calculated curve, and then the experimental data, the emitter push at length, is just on the line of the experiment, and we can see it's pretty much matching. All right. So the models that we generated is based on the vacancy model, and especially for the phosphorus, we realized that it does have the doubly negatively charged vacancies. That is important. And then in a heavily doped case, where by the dissociation reaction, it should have the enhancement of the concentration of V minus concentration, right? And then that from that we have enhancement of the diffusion coefficient, and that we're going to control the tail region of the phosphorus, And then this emitter push is another example that this vacancy model may work to explain the emitter push phenomena. The other experiments, I just replaced this experimental thing. Well, other experiments you just read at home, okay? This is I just replaced this. So at the next lecture, I'll prepare the clear picture of this, and then let's discuss about it next time. Okay, let's just make a summary of the first one. So what we have talked. Well, it has two cases where the concentration of the dopant is less than the intrinsic. In other words, the lightly doped case. Then even though the diffusion coefficient can be expressed generally like this, we may take just the constant value of the diffusion coefficient so that we can solve the fixed second law, the diffusion profile, according to the approximated equations. We just use the simple diffusion coefficient to solve the partial differential equations. But if you have a heavy concentration of the dopant, then the doubly negatively charged vacancies is more important because we have an n squared term in front of the double minus. Right? So the equation can be approximated like this. We just omit the singularly negatively charged vacancies coupling, and then from here we at the surface n square is proportionality is going to be n square, but in the tail region we have this extra vacancies coming from the dissociation of V double minus into the V minus, and then the ratio is going to be something like this, 0.3 electron volts per kT. So at the tail region we have an enhancement of the diffusion, and this is not a good news in a normal situation. In general, impurity profiles must be numerically calculated, although some approximations do exist. So it is not that difficult to have a numerical solution. So you just put everything in a computer and then make a computer calculate. So in one sense, you may say, why do we worry about this physics too much? Okay, if you want to solve the fixed second law, all you have to do is just put everything in the computer and then get the numerical solution, and then you have your better profile of the impurities. But it is very important to understand the basic reasoning, what's happening inside the diffusion like this, because if we understand the basic physics, then we come to understand the emitter push phenomenon, for example. Okay? If you put everything in a computer and then have a numerical solutions all the time, then you never understand why we have the emitter push phenomenon. But if you approach everything and the analytical solutions and try to understand what's happening, then you come to find something new. Okay, so that's why we want to use the vacancy model, develop the vacancy model to understand the diffusion of these things. Now, let me tell just one thing. Values by the factor something like this, right? And this factor is coming from the V double minus and V minus dissociation reactions. Now, so the profile we're going to have at the surface is proportional to the n square, and then with somehow enhancement at the tail. I just exaggerate a little bit. And in the tail region, we have some enhancement, something like this, when originally it should be something like this if we don't have any enhancement, right? Now, you may think that this difference is not that great, it's not that much, so what's a big deal about it? But in ULSI, okay, ULSI, the junction depth has to be controlled less than a micron levels. That is a very, very short distance. Okay? That means that we have to be very precise. And the junction depth usually determined when the basic doping concentration equal to the tail region concentration. So at this point is going to be the junction depth. So with this tailing, okay, we have a junction depth here, and it's supposed to be here. Without this enhancement, the junction depth is going to be here, but with the enhancement, the junction gets deeper. And this difference may reach 2 microns, and it is going to be a big matter in making transistors for the ULSI. Well, VLSI levels may not be an important factor. So this is why for the source and drains in the MOS devices and emitters in bipolar transistors, we do not use a phosphorus. We have to use arsenic, which is going to be, which has been discussed in the last time, right? And the reason is it does have the extra diffusions because of the dissociation reaction in the phosphorus. But in arsenic, we don't have that. We just have a square profile. So we have a better control of the junction depth. Okay, do you have any questions? Well, next Monday, we discuss about the boron and wrap up the diffusion profiles, and then we move to the oxidation reactions. Okay, I'll see you next week.